I started out about 40 years ago in school psychology, okay, realized somewhere along the way in the practice of school psychology that there was something called a family that needed to be addressed, and I couldn't deal with a kid in isolation, so I went into marriage and family studies, and from there into mental health counseling studies and so on, and gradually took, I did this through, by the way, my association with Albert Ellis in New York, who was the granddaddy of cognitive behavior psychology, and got trained in his school of thought back before it was popular, and then he went into the mainstream. I was in Pennsylvania at the time, and I learned through his grapevine that there were some people here in Florida who wanted to open a branch of the Institute, and they were looking for someone to come down from New York and do that, so I leapt at it. And in 1973, I came down to open the Florida's first branch of what was then called the Institute for Rational Living, Institute for Rational Emotive Therapy, since called the Ellis Institute. And about 10 years later, came across trauma, and it turned me around, big time. I have been for many years a kind of a continuing education addict. It's been wonderful beyond belief, just wonderful. And the particular experience that accounts for my being in trauma was like turning a freight train 90 degrees, you know. I mean, it really turned me around, because before that, my colleagues and I in the, what is now called the cognitive behaviorist segment of the profession, were very happily doing some things that I still have a great admiration for, that are terribly useful, but represent the tip of the iceberg, because we were very fixed on what was going on in present time, right? Because we knew absolutely and correctly that anybody who is having any distress, personal or emotional distress, has a thought process going on at that moment, right, in present time, that accounts for it, right, or that is at least correlated with it. And that is so very addressable. So that's what we were doing. And that's what, in the main, is going on in the professional community. It's identifying errant patterns of thinking that produce errant patterns of feeling and behaving. That's the short story on the cognitive behaviorist mission. But underneath all of that errant thinking that produces the errant feeling and behaving are some crummy experiences. And as long as they remain unresolved, they are going to be feeding their toxins, so to speak, into the behavioral repertoire of anybody who's got them. And that's everybody, okay? So basically what my profession has been providing over the years is containment, basic containment, you know. You're beautiful, you are okay, you have a right to be who you are and feel the way you do. However, you've got some patterns going here that are counterproductive, so let's get a handle on them, right? And I'll help you get a handle on them. So that's containment. There's a lot of good stuff going on there, but it doesn't get to the root. In fact, most of my colleagues, and I include myself in that bag, you know, myself and all of my colleagues, were very reluctant to have our clients dig into really serious trauma in our counseling or therapy sessions. Because when you do that, people have a tendency to react, or as we say in the trade, abreact, when we get really upset. And counseling and therapy doesn't work well in that context, all right? Because when you're trying to guide or educate people, you need them to be lucid and clear-minded in those moments, you know. The counseling session was supposed to be a little sea of tranquility in which we can talk about what's going wrong in your life and how to deal with it, contain it, handle it better, and so on. But not if you're sobbing and gasping and climbing the wall, all right? So we don't want to go into that as a rule, and this whole business of being trauma-aware just turns that whole concept on its head, because there's no way to deal with a trauma and resolve a trauma and take it out of the system as a contributor to people's upset if you just don't want to go there and look at it. Can't be done, all right? Well, I have to admit there are people who are trying to do it. They pump you full of drugs, but that's not the way to do it. Every presenting problem, however concrete and visible and simple and stupid, is driven by something. It's driven by something. Somebody got to that point for a reason, you know? You flip open their history and take a look and you'll see it. And if you don't do anything about it, you will be handling that current event over and over and over and over, trying to get them to contain it, brute force it out of the way. It doesn't work well. Never has. One of the things that we turn up in the helping professions routinely is problems that are born of remedies, right? The whole addiction thing, drugs, alcohol, and so on. They're not the problem. They never were. Those were the remedies gone wrong, okay? But the drug and alcohol rehab community pretty much focuses on getting people off of their substance. An absolutely good and worthy thing to do, because those things will kill you. So we have to get people off of them. But if that's pretty much all you do, and you don't find what's driving their use, that's why they relapse, okay? So you start wherever they start. You know, if you want to call alcohol the problem, go ahead. But you better realize that that's really just a symptom of something underneath, okay? And go for it. When you really get into trauma studies, you become aware of what's at the rest of the iceberg, you know? So big change, just completely transformed my view of the problems that were being presented to me in practice. And I began to take them on, starting with whatever the client was presenting, of course, and finding the trauma at the root of them and resolving those. And it makes all the difference. People come back and say they don't have the problem anymore. They don't have to cope with it. They don't have to put up with it. They don't have to compensate for it. They don't need new skills. They don't have to say a mantra. They don't have to take medication. It's just gone. And that's the way we want it. The interest in the development of having a trauma-informed community, which I attribute to the good work done by Felitti in the ACE study, is the most wonderful thing I didn't expect to see in my lifetime. However, I think because of the way my profession is structured, it will probably go through a number of developmental phases, okay? And the phase that I think we're in now and or at least coming into now, and I don't know a way to avoid this, is the general sentiment that now that we have identified trauma as such an important contributor to people's miseries, and we sort of brought it out of the closet, okay? That anyone who has been traumatized needs to have a whole lot of very, very special, intelligent, caring consideration. And that looks good in print, doesn't it? But it's going to slow the process up if the service providers don't get beyond that concept, okay? It's a wonderful concept. Certainly anybody who has been abused through a war, raped, in a train wreck, whatever, really deserves to be understood as having been injured, even if there was no physical injury, all right? Even if it was all just purely emotional, psychological horror, okay? They deserve to be understood. They deserve to be cared for. But they also deserve to know that there's a way to get beyond that, okay? And that trauma-informed care mustn't be allowed to become a kind of enabling someone to have a trauma-afflicted life thereafter and forevermore. And you're beginning to see that, okay? You're beginning to see the transformation from intolerance or simple misunderstanding of what it is to be traumatized, okay, to a kind of what you might also actually call enabling in some cases, wherein the traumatized person is understood now or encouraged to take the position of, hey, you have to recognize how I am because of the experience I've been through, and that's the way I am now, okay? So, you know, get on the ball, exercise your capacity for trauma-informed caring, and take care of my environment for me, for God's sake. All right? Now, this is somewhat parallel to putting in ramps for people who are in wheelchairs. And we gladly do that. If we're smart, we'll gladly do that. And we have doors that open automatically. And we have Braille on signs on the wall, okay? But we have those accommodations for people whose afflictions are truly incurable. And we ought to. And that's the danger. That this will become, in some circles or for some little while, it will become a very caring service to people who are treated as if they were incurable. Well, there is the next step. We just have to move people into it without a whole lot of delay so that we don't create the culture in which someone who has been traumatized takes on the identity, which is the current reality. The current reality is, this is what happened to me. You cannot change that. Can't change the past, can't change history. So therefore, the way I am is the way I am. And you have to respect that, okay? And that's what makes long-term curable cases into long-term incurable cases, because they're not seeing it. They're not taking the next step.